Nobody should sleep hungry outside a place that still has bread. At 11:43 on a Thursday night in late October, Eileen Porter was still awake inside Porter's Hearth Bakery, folding dough beneath the warm yellow light of the back counter. The front door had been locked since 9 o'clock. The cash drawer held only $86.40, and the last tray of sourdough was cooling beside a chipped white scale that had measured flour for 22 years. The whole shop smelled of toasted crust, melted butter, wet wool from the coats drying near the wall, and the faint sharpness of rye starter bubbling in a glass jar by the sink. Outside, the old county road was nearly empty except for the occasional 18-wheeler rolling toward Route 17, its headlights stretching across the rain like pale ribbons. Eileen was 57 then, with tired brown eyes, gray starting at her temples, and hands that looked older than her face from years of kneading dough before sunrise. She had planned to finish the morning batch, shut off the oven, and walk upstairs to the little apartment above the bakery. Then she saw him. A white biker stood beneath the narrow awning, not touching the door, not waving for help, not even looking directly inside for more than a second at a time. He was tall, broad, and soaked through, wearing a black leather vest over a dark shirt, with a long scar cutting down from his left cheek toward his jaw. Beside the curb sat an old 1998 Harley-Davidson Road King, its chrome dulled by rain, one saddlebag tied with a cracked leather strap. The man looked rugged enough to make most people step back, but Eileen noticed something else first. He was staring at the bread, not greedily, not rudely, just the way a hungry man looks at food when pride will not let him ask for it. For nearly 10 seconds, Eileen did nothing. She had been warned before about opening after hours. Her late husband used to tell her that kindness needed a lock on it after dark. And in a town where people remembered rumors longer than they remembered favors, a lone woman opening a bakery door for a scarred biker at midnight was the kind of story that could be bent into something ugly by morning. Still, the man did not knock. He simply turned as if to leave. That was when Eileen reached under the counter, unlocked the door, and opened it just wide enough for the smell of hot bread to meet the cold rain. "Are you hungry?" she asked. The biker lowered his eyes, as if the question itself cost him something. "I can pay tomorrow," he said, his voice rough but careful. Eileen looked at the cooling rack. Only one loaf had split perfectly down the top, the one stamped with her old wooden wheat mark, the bakery's quiet signature since 1976. She wrapped it in plain brown paper, added a small cup of water, and placed both in his hands. "No charge," she said. He frowned, not offended, but wounded by the mercy of it. "Ma'am, I don't take what I can't earn." Eileen held his gaze through the doorway. "Then sit under the awning and earn it by staying dry." For the first time, his mouth moved like he almost remembered how to smile. He sat on the old wooden bench outside, shoulders hunched, steam rising from the torn bread as he pulled it apart with both hands. Eileen watched from behind the glass while he ate slowly, like every bite had to pass through grief before it reached hunger. At 12:08, he stood, folded the empty paper twice, and pressed his palm against his chest in a silent thank you. She never asked his name. He never gave it. Then the 1998 Road King coughed to life, rolled away into the wet black road, and vanished beyond the bakery lights. Eileen thought she had given away one loaf of bread. She had no idea that one free loaf would keep traveling long after the rain stopped. Years passed, and the bakery stayed open the way certain old lights stay on in a town that has forgotten why it needs them. By 3:35 every morning, Eileen Porter was downstairs with her apron tied, her hair pinned back, and her hands buried wrist-deep in flour. Porter's Hearth Bakery still sat at the edge of the old county road, still smelled of sourdough, cinnamon, black coffee, and warm butter, and the aging lease covered both the storefront and the small apartment above it, which meant losing the bakery would also mean losing the room where she slept. But the town around it had changed. The hardware store 2 doors down had become a glass-front leasing office. The family tailor had been replaced by a boutique with $140 shirts in the window. The little shoe repair shop across the street now had brown paper taped inside the windows and a red notice from the county inspector. Eileen tried not to look at it too long. She had enough notices of her own. Her monthly rent had climbed from $1,850 to $3,200 in less than 4 years. A new insurance policy added another $417 a month. The old deck oven needed a replacement part that cost $2,760 before labor. And on the first Tuesday of November, a man named Vernon Larch walked into her bakery at 8:12 in the morning wearing a camel-colored overcoat, polished brown shoes, and the calm smile of someone who had already counted the bricks. He ordered one black coffee, paid with a $50 bill, and left the change in the tip jar like a performance. Then he looked around the room as if the tables, the counter, the wheat-mark loaves, and even Eileen herself were pieces on a board. "Mrs. Porter," he said, "you've carried this place longer than most people would have had the strength to." It sounded kind. It was not. Vernon explained that his investment group was acquiring several properties along the old road. A medical plaza, a wellness cafe, maybe luxury apartments above retail. Clean sidewalks, better lighting, higher value. "Sentiment will not fix old wiring, Mrs. Porter," he said. "I am offering this block a future." He said the words as if value could only mean money. Eileen kept wiping the same section of counter while he spoke. "And where would the bakery go?" she asked. Vernon smiled again. "At your stage in life, relocation may not be the wisest burden." There it was, softly said, carefully dressed, still cruel. He slid a folded offer across the counter. $38,000 to walk away before the end of the year. Enough to make leaving sound reasonable. Not enough to lease a new kitchen, move the ovens, replace the sign, and begin again. For one long minute, Eileen understood why tired people sold the places they loved. Then she left the paper where it was. She looked past him at the booth by the window, where a night shift nurse had once fallen asleep over a butter roll at 6:20 a.m. She looked at the corner table where her late husband used to repair the receipt printer with a screwdriver and stubborn patience. She looked at the wooden wheat mold hanging beside the bread rack, darkened by decades of flour dust and heat. "This place is not finished," she said. Vernon's eyes cooled, though his smile remained. "Most places are decided by timing, Mrs. Porter, not by memory." After he left, the bell over the door kept swinging for several seconds, too bright and cheerful for what had just happened. Eileen opened the folded offer at last. The numbers were clean. The language was polite. But every sentence felt like a hand pressing gently against the back of her neck, guiding her toward the exit. That evening, she stayed open until 10:15, 45 minutes past closing, because two truck drivers came in late for rye loaves and coffee. The register ended at $214.70 for the day. Not terrible. Not enough. Not when rent alone now came to more than $100 a day before flour, butter, payroll, and power. Upstairs, in the apartment above the shop, Eileen sat at her small kitchen table with a calculator, a pencil, and 3 bills spread in front of her. She circled one number twice, then set the pencil down because her hand had started to shake. Outside, rain tapped the same glass it had tapped years before. The road was empty. The bakery lights glowed against the dark. And somewhere far beyond town, a man with a scar on his face still remembered the taste of bread he had never paid for. The first notice came on a pale yellow sheet taped to the bakery window at 7:06 on a Monday morning. It said the sidewalk sign outside Porter's Hearth Bakery extended 4 inches beyond the approved clearance line. 4 inches. Eileen measured it twice with the same metal ruler she used to cut pastry strips, then moved the sign closer to the wall until it nearly touched the brick. The second notice arrived 3 days later, this time about the back steps needing updated traction strips. The third mentioned the alley light, though that light had been fixed in March for $186. The fourth came from the landlord's office, reminding her that the lease allowed reasonable exterior improvements if ownership of the block changed hands. Nobody said Vernon Larch's name. They did not have to. By the second week, people began looking away. The woman from the boutique stopped buying Friday cinnamon knots. The barber across the road waved less. Even Mr. Hensley, the retired mail carrier who had taken black coffee at the same table for 11 years, started saying he was in a hurry and leaving with his cup untouched. Eileen understood fear when she saw it. Vernon was not threatening anyone. He was simply making everyone calculate what their silence might be worth. On Thursday night, she stayed open until 10:30 because the rain had returned and the old road was slick with oil shine under the streetlights. She sold only 9 loaves after dinner. The register held $119.25. She counted it once, then again, then left the drawer open because closing it felt too final. At 10:47, a black pickup slowed in front of the shop. A man in a gray coat stepped out, took pictures of the window, the sidewalk, the roofline, and the narrow side alley where flower deliveries came in before sunrise. He never entered. He never spoke. He just photographed the building as if Eileen had already become an obstacle on someone else's blueprint. She stood behind the counter with one hand on the old wooden wheat mold, feeling the flour dust in its grooves. It had been carved by her husband's father in 1976, long before glossy signs and redevelopment maps, back when a loaf of bread cost 60 cents and people paid with folded bills warm from their pockets. "Still here," she whispered, though she was not sure whether she was speaking to the shop or to herself. Then, just after 11:12, the first motorcycle came around the bend from Route 17. Its headlight moved through the rain like a slow white coin. A second followed, then a third. Within 2 minutes, 7 motorcycles had parked across the street in marked spaces, engines rumbling low, not roaring, not showing off, leaving the sidewalk and bakery entrance clear. The men who stepped down were all white, older, broad-shouldered, and weathered by road years. Black leather vests, heavy boots, gray beards, scarred hands. No one shouted. No one crowded the door. They simply stood in the rain, facing the bakery, while the warm light from Eileen's windows touched their jackets. Eileen's stomach tightened. She had dealt with notices, bills, polite cruelty, and empty chairs, but this was different. A group of bikers outside a struggling bakery could become exactly the kind of story Vernon wanted. She reached for the phone, stopped, then looked again. The man at the front removed his gloves slowly. He was tall, 63 now, with a silver-streaked beard and a scar running from his left cheek toward his jaw. Something about the way he stood beneath the awning pulled an old memory from a locked place in her mind. A wet night. A loaf split perfectly down the top. A hungry man who had promised to pay tomorrow. The bell over the door gave a small, bright ring as he stepped inside alone. He kept both hands visible, his voice low and careful. "Ma'am," he said, looking past her to the bread rack. "Do you still make the loaf with the wheat mark?" Eileen did not answer right away. The question seemed too small for the weight it carried. Her eyes moved from the scar on his cheek to the line of older bikers waiting outside, then to the wooden wheat mold hanging beside the bread rack. It was dark with age, its handle worn smooth by decades of flour and heat, the carved wheat stem still sharp enough to press a clean mark into soft dough. She reached for the nearest loaf on the cooling rack, one of only 4 left from the late batch. The crust was deep brown, cracked along the top, and stamped with the faint shape of wheat near the heel. "I still make it," she said. Her voice sounded steadier than she felt. The biker took one step closer, then stopped, as if crossing the space too quickly would be disrespectful. He looked at the loaf the way some men look at a photograph they thought they had lost. "Same smell," he murmured. "Rye starter, butter on the pans, and that deep crust I never forgot." Eileen's fingers tightened around the bread paper. "You've been here before." He nodded once. "Long time ago. Rain worse than this. Around midnight. I had a Road King outside with a bad coil and $6 in my pocket." The number struck her harder than his face. $6. She remembered him saying he could pay tomorrow. She remembered thinking he looked like pride was the only thing keeping him upright. The biker swallowed, and for the first time his rough composure thinned. "You opened the door after closing. Gave me a loaf with that mark on it. Water too." Eileen set the loaf on the counter between them. "I remember a hungry man," she said. "I don't remember him giving me a name." The biker's mouth moved like a smile had to fight through years of hard weather to reach the surface. "Clayton Rourke." He glanced toward the window, where the others stood under the rain-dark streetlights, quiet as church statues in leather. "Back then, I wasn't worth much to anybody, least of all myself." Eileen looked down, not from discomfort, but because the truth in his voice felt private. Clayton did not dramatize it. He did not turn pain into a speech. He only rested one hand flat on the counter, scarred knuckles still, wedding band absent, fingers marked by old road burns and engine work. "That bread kept me sitting on your bench long enough for an old riding friend to find me after my Road King broke down near Route 17, he said. "He brought me back, fed me again, put tools in my hands, gave me rules when I didn't trust myself with freedom." Outside, one of the bikers shifted his weight, but did not enter. Clayton kept his eyes on the wheat-mark loaf. For years, I told them about the woman who gave me bread and didn't ask what I had done wrong to end up hungry. I didn't know your name. Didn't know the shop's name. I only remembered the wheat mark. Eileen felt heat rise behind her eyes and forced it back. She had given away hundreds of loaves in her life. Day-old bread to night workers. Broken rolls to people short on cash. Coffee to men who pretended they were not cold. She had never thought of those things as rescue. They were just what a bakery did when it still had food at the end of the day. "How did you find me?" she asked. Clayton reached into the inside pocket of his vest and pulled out a folded piece of brown butcher paper, dry despite the rain. On it was a smudged charcoal rubbing of the wheat mark, copied from a loaf bought by a truck driver at 5:40 that morning. No letter. No old photograph. No dramatic confession. Just the shape of wheat pressed into bread, carried down Route 17 by someone who remembered a story told at club tables for years. "A driver came through last week," Clayton said. "Said the bakery with the wheat bread was getting squeezed by a man buying the block." Eileen's face changed. The warmth in the room suddenly met the cold thing waiting outside her life. "If Vernon sees your motorcycles here, he'll use it against me." Clayton nodded as if he had expected that. "Then we won't be trouble." He picked up the loaf and placed exact payment on the counter, $4.75, plus a $5 tip folded clean beneath the price tag. "We'll be customers." For the first time that night, Eileen looked past fear and saw what was actually standing outside her door. Not a threat, not a spectacle. 7 older men waiting in the rain because one of them had been fed when he was empty. Clayton turned toward the window and gave the smallest signal with 2 fingers. The bikers stepped forward one by one, calmly, respectfully, forming a line outside the bakery beneath the yellow light. No shouting, no engines, no intimidation. Just men with weathered faces and empty hands, waiting to buy bread. The first biker to enter after Clayton was a white man near 70 with a broad chest, silver hair tied at the back, and a limp he tried to hide by moving slowly. He wiped his boots twice before stepping past the threshold, then looked at Eileen with the careful politeness of a man entering someone else's home. "1 wheat loaf, ma'am," he said, "and whatever coffee's still warm." Behind him came another, then another, each man waiting his turn, each paying full price, each keeping his voice low enough that the bakery still felt like a bakery and not a scene. By 11:38, the 4 remaining loaves were gone. So were the 6 oatmeal rolls, 3 apple hand pies, and the half tray of butter biscuits Eileen had planned to save for morning. The register, which had held $119, 25 less than an hour earlier, now held $183.50. Not enough to save anything by itself. Enough to change the air. Eileen reached for the closed sign, but Clayton shook his head gently. "Only if you're tired," he said. "Not if you're scared." That made her stop. The older biker with the limp, whose name was Arlen Bruck, took a paper cup of coffee to the corner table and sat with both hands around it like he was warming more than his fingers. Another man quietly asked if she had flour for one more batch. Eileen almost laughed from exhaustion. Bread takes time. Clayton looked toward the dark kitchen. "We've got time." At 11:52, Eileen tied her apron again. Clayton and the others did not invade the kitchen. They stayed where customers belonged. One man swept rainwater away from the entrance without being asked. Another straightened the chairs by the window. Arlen paid $3 for the broken cinnamon roll, left 9 more in the tip jar, and said he preferred it that way. The gestures were small, almost awkward, but they were clean. No pity, no performance, just presence. Across the street, a curtain moved in the upstairs window of the new leasing office. Someone was watching. Eileen saw it and felt the old fear return. "This is what I meant," she said quietly to Clayton. "By morning, people will say I brought a biker club here to scare the block." Clayton took that in without offense. He looked at the rain-dark windows, the empty street, the little yellow notices still stacked near her register. "Then we make sure morning sees receipts," he said. He asked for nothing secret. No favors. No names spoken in anger. He simply bought another coffee, wrote the time and amount on the customer copy, and placed it neatly beside the register. Then he told every man in line to do the same. By 12:20, Porter's Hearth Bakery had a row of clean receipts showing coffee, bread, rolls, and tips. Customers, not trouble. Eileen watched the paper slips gather like small legal witnesses. At 12:31, a white sedan slowed outside. Vernon Larch sat behind the wheel, his camel overcoat collar visible above the door, his face washed pale by the dashboard light. He did not get out. He looked at the motorcycles, then at the warm bakery windows, then at Clayton standing inside with a paper cup in one hand and both shoulders relaxed. Clayton did not stare him down. He did not move toward the door. He only turned slightly, placing himself between the counter and the window, not as a threat, but as a wall made of patience. Vernon drove away after 20 seconds, slow enough to be noticed, fast enough to pretend he had not been. Eileen let out a breath she had not meant to hold. "He'll come back with a cleaner story," she said. Clayton nodded. "Men like that usually do." He looked at the wheat mold hanging beside the rack. "So we bring a cleaner truth." Before closing, the bikers carried their paper bags out into the rain. Not one engine started loud. Not one man lingered in a way that would frighten a passerby. But before Clayton left, he asked Eileen for 12 wheatmark loaves by Friday night, paid half in advance, and gave her the order under the name Road Table Coffee Run. "Who are they for?" she asked. Clayton pulled on his gloves, his scar catching the bakery light. "People working after midnight," he said. "The kind who don't always ask when they're hungry." After the last motorcycle rolled toward Route 17, Eileen locked the door at 1:06 a.m. The bakery was a mess. The sink was full. Her back ached. But the room no longer felt like a place waiting to be emptied. It smelled of fresh dough starting again, black coffee, wet leather fading from the air, and something she had almost forgotten how to recognize: company. By Friday morning, Vernon Larch had changed his approach. He did not come into the bakery himself. Instead, a neat envelope arrived by courier at 8:05, addressed to Eileen Porter in sharp black type. Inside was a formal complaint about customer access interference, late-night gathering, and potential nuisance affecting tenant relations. The words sounded expensive, but none of them named a single customer who had been harmed. Eileen read that line twice beside the register while the first batch of wheatmark loaves cooled behind her, 12 of them lined up like small brown shields. The bakery smelled of toasted rye, honey, coffee grounds, and the faint smoke from the deck oven's left side running too hot again. Her hands did not shake this time, not because she was no longer afraid, but because fear had company now. At 9:17, Clayton Rourke walked in alone, wearing the same black leather vest, rain-dark boots, and calm expression that never tried to make itself friendly for strangers. He bought a black coffee for $2.25, placed the receipt carefully beside the others, and asked, "Did he put it in writing?" Eileen slid the envelope across the counter. Clayton read it without moving his mouth. He did not curse. He did not laugh. He simply tapped one sentence with a scarred finger. "This part says people felt unsafe." Eileen looked toward the empty tables. "People say a lot when they think paper makes it true." Clayton nodded. "Then we bring people who know different." Over the next 2 days, the story began to move, not loudly, but steadily. A nurse from the night clinic came in at 6:10 a.m. and told Eileen she still remembered the winter morning when Eileen had let her pay for 2 rolls with a promise after her paycheck was delayed. A road crew foreman bought 8 butter biscuits and said Porter's hearth had kept his men fed during the ice storm of 2018 when the gas station microwaves failed. A retired school custodian came in with exact change for a loaf and stood awkwardly by the counter until he admitted Eileen had once delivered bread to his wife during recovery, refusing payment because neighbors do not invoice neighbors for getting through a hard week. Eileen had forgotten half of these moments. They had not. Clayton never pushed them to speak. He only listened, bought coffee, and wrote down dates when people offered them. Not accusations, not rumors, just memories with names, times, and receipts where they existed. By Sunday night, Vernon's clean story had begun to crack. The same boutique owner who had stopped buying cinnamon knots came in at 7:42 p.m., cheeks pink with embarrassment, and ordered 6. She said little, but before leaving, she placed one of Vernon's redevelopment flyers on the counter and whispered, "He told us the bakery was already leaving." Eileen looked at the flyer. It was marked preliminary leasing concept, but the drawing had already erased Porter's hearth and replaced it with a glass storefront labeled Future Retail. Her bakery had been removed before she had ever agreed to go. For a long moment, the oven seemed too loud. Clayton, seated near the window, saw her face change and stood slowly. "Is that what I think it is?" he asked. Eileen handed it to him. He studied the glossy paper, then looked at the wheat mold hanging by the rack. "He didn't just try to buy the place," Clayton said. "He tried to make everyone believe it was already gone." That sentence settled into the room like a match waiting for someone careful to strike it. Eileen did not want revenge. She wanted her front door, her ovens, her morning customers, and the right to decide when the last loaf came out. Clayton understood that. So the bikers planned nothing dramatic. No shouting, no blockade, no threats. They planned a Friday night bread run with 12 loaves, then 24, then 48 if Eileen could manage it. Every loaf would be bought. Every delivery would be clean. Every person receiving bread would know exactly whose bakery had made it and exactly who was trying to erase it. Vernon had money, flyers, and polished shoes. Before Friday night arrived, Eileen had something he had mistaken for weakness. People who remembered being fed. Friday came in cold, clear, and sharper than the rain. By 6 p.m., Porter's Hearth Bakery was brighter than it had been in months. Every table pushed against the wall, every cooling rack loaded, every paper bag folded open and waiting. The boutique owner had arrived early to fold bags and label orders, the first apology she knew how to make. Eileen had slept only 3 hours, but her eyes were awake in a way exhaustion could not explain. 48 wheatmark loaves sat in rows behind the counter, each crust stamped with the old carved wheat stem, each one paid for before it ever left the building. The first order slip read Road Table Coffee Run, $228. 00, paid in full. The second listed 24 butter rolls for the road crew on County 9. The third was for the night clinic. The fourth had no organization name, only a note in Clayton's blocky handwriting, for anyone working past midnight. By the corner of the counter sat 3 new standing orders: the night clinic every Tuesday, the county crew twice a month, and Road Table Coffee Run on the first Friday. Eileen ran her thumb over the paper and felt something in her chest steady itself. At 7:14, the motorcycles arrived, not roaring, not showing off, just rolling into parking spaces along the curb with their headlights low and their engines settling one by one. Clayton Rourke came in first, followed by Arlen Bruck and 9 other older white riders who had joined the run that week, all with gray beards, scarred knuckles, heavy boots, and the careful discipline of men who understood how easily they could be misunderstood. Clayton placed a stack of small printed cards on the counter. They were plain, white, and simple, each one stamped in the corner with the same wheat mark from Eileen's wooden mold. Bread bought from Porter's Hearth Bakery, delivered by local riders, no charge, no obligation. Eileen read the words twice. There was no accusation against Vernon, no demand, no slogan, just the name of the bakery and the quiet fact of the bread. "This is all?" she asked. Clayton nodded. Truth doesn't need decorations. By 8:03, the first people began arriving without motorcycles. A nurse in blue scrubs, 2 road workers in reflective jackets, a retired custodian wearing a brown cap. The boutique owner stayed near the counter with her sleeves rolled up, carrying empty boxes and an apology she was not yet brave enough to say out loud. Then came the truck drivers. Then a young couple who remembered buying their wedding breakfast there for $31.60 when they could not afford a reception. Then 3 town workers who said they had seen Vernon's flyer and wanted to know why a place still full of people had been drawn like an empty lot. Eileen kept moving behind the counter, wrapping bread, pouring coffee, making change, but at some point she stopped trying to hide the tears gathering in her eyes. She did not break down. She did not make a speech. She only kept handing out warm loaves with both hands. Across the street, Vernon Larch arrived at 8:46 in his white sedan. This time he stepped out. Camel overcoat, polished shoes, calm smile fixed too carefully on his face. He looked at the line stretching from the bakery door to the corner, then at the motorcycles, then at the customers holding wheatmark cards and warm brown bags. For a few seconds, he seemed to be calculating what this gathering was supposed to be called. It was not a protest. It was not a threat. It was not disorder. It was commerce, memory, and gratitude standing under streetlights. Vernon crossed the road and approached the door just as Clayton stepped outside with 2 bags of bread in his hands. Clayton did not block him. He only stood near enough that Eileen would not have to face him alone. Vernon's voice stayed smooth. "Mrs. Porter and I should speak privately." Eileen looked up from the counter. The whole bakery seemed to grow still around her. Clayton turned his scarred face slightly toward Vernon and spoke in the same low, careful voice he had used the first night he returned. Not behind closed doors. No one cheered. No one clapped. That made it stronger. Vernon's smile thinned as the people in line turned, not with anger, but with attention. The nurse, the road crew foreman, the custodian, the boutique owner, the truck drivers, the men in leather, all watching quietly as the man who had tried to erase a bakery discovered that the bakery had witnesses. Vernon Larch looked at Clayton Rourke as if he were deciding whether a quiet man could still be turned into a problem on paper. Clayton gave him nothing useful. No raised voice. No step forward. No clenched fist. Just a scarred, older biker holding 2 paid bags of bread, standing beside the doorway like a man waiting for the truth to finish walking in. Eileen came from behind the counter slowly, wiping flour from her hands onto her apron. She was tired enough that her shoulders ached, but for the first time in weeks, she did not feel smaller than the room. "You wanted to speak," she said. Vernon glanced at the line of customers, then at the motorcycles parked under the streetlights, then at the white cards in people's hands. "This appears to have become a public matter," he said, still smiling. The retired custodian in the brown cap answered before Eileen could. "You made it public when you put her building on a flyer without her permission." No one shouted after that. They did not need to. The boutique owner stepped forward and placed Vernon's glossy redevelopment flyer on the counter, smoothing it with trembling fingers. Beside it, Clayton placed one of the plain bread run cards. The difference between them was almost embarrassing. Vernon's flyer showed the whole block polished, expensive, and empty of memory. The bread card showed only a bakery name, a delivery note, and no charge. Eileen looked down at both pieces of paper. One promised value. The other proved it. At 9:02, the landlord arrived, called in by Vernon earlier, but now visibly unsure what room he had walked into. He was a narrow white man in his early 60s named Graham Pell, with rimless glasses and the worried posture of someone who had expected signatures, not witnesses. Vernon moved toward him quickly. "Graham, this is exactly the instability I warned you about." Clayton turned his head, but did not interrupt. Eileen did. "Instability?" she asked. "These are customers." She reached behind the counter and lifted the stack of receipts from the past week. Coffee, wheat loaves, butter rolls, 48 bread run orders, tips, names where people had chosen to leave them. She set them beside the flyer, not dramatically, just carefully, one clean stack against one glossy lie. Then the night clinic nurse added her receipt. The road crew foreman added his. The young couple added a faded digital payment screenshot from years ago, printed on regular paper, showing $31.60 for breakfast on the morning after their courthouse wedding. More came forward. Not accusations. Proof of life. Proof of use. Proof that Porter's hearth was not a failing space waiting to be replaced, but a working place people still needed. Vernon's smile finally lost its softness. "Sentiment does not pay commercial rent," he said. The words landed colder than he intended. Eileen nodded once, as if accepting the truth inside the cruelty. "No," she said. "Customers do." Graham Pell looked at the receipts, then at the line still stretching outside the door. Arlen Bruck, the older biker with the limp, quietly paid for another dozen rolls and asked for a receipt before the silence could thin. The register printed again. Small sound. Large answer. Vernon tried once more, lowering his voice toward Graham, but Clayton stepped slightly aside, making sure everyone could see there was no intimidation, only openness. "Say it where she can't hear you," Clayton said. Vernon stopped. That was the moment the room understood him. Not because he had confessed to anything, but because he could no longer perform kindness in private and pressure in public at the same time. Graham removed his glasses, rubbed the bridge of his nose, and told Eileen he would come back Monday with something in writing. Not a miracle. Not a victory parade. A door opened 3 inches. Sometimes 3 inches was enough to breathe. Vernon folded his flyer and left without buying anything. Nobody followed him. Nobody mocked him. Eileen watched his white sedan pull away from the curb, then looked back at the receipts, the bread cards, the wheat mold, and the people still waiting patiently for warm loaves. Clayton placed the 2 bags he had been holding back on the counter. "Where do these go?" Eileen asked, her voice rough with exhaustion. Clayton looked toward the dark road beyond Route 17. County night crew first, he said. Then the clinic. Eileen tied the top of each bag with plain string, pressed the old wheat mold into one more soft round of dough, and understood that the bakery had not been saved by noise. It had been defended by people who remembered where they had been fed. Monday morning arrived with a hard frost on the bakery windows and a thin line of pale sun over Route 17. Eileen Porter had slept only 2 hours, but she opened at 5:30 the way she always had, tying her apron, feeding the rye starter, and setting the old wooden wheat mold beside the first tray of dough. At 8 o'clock, Graham Pell came in with a folder under one arm and the careful look of a man who had spent the weekend understanding what a place was worth beyond square footage. Vernon Larch did not come with him. That told Eileen something before anyone spoke. Graham ordered black coffee, paid $2.25, asked for a receipt, and then sat at the window table where the morning light touched the flour dust still caught in the grain of the wood. Clayton Rourke arrived 10 minutes later with Arlen Bruck and 2 other riders, but they did not crowd the meeting. They bought bread, stood near the front window, and let Eileen speak for herself. Graham explained that the full sale was paused. He brought a written temporary extension and a draft 3-year renewal for legal review with a controlled rent increase. Repair credit toward the deck oven part Eileen had priced at $2,760, and a clause protecting the storefront from being advertised as vacant while Eileen was still operating. It was not charity. It was not a fantasy rescue. It was a fair chance. Eileen read every line twice. Her hands trembled once, then steadied when Clayton gently slid the stack of receipts from the bread run beside the agreement. Not as pressure, as proof. The bakery had customers. It had memory, and it had a future if people stopped treating it like something already dead. At 8:47, Eileen signed her name. Nobody cheered loudly. That would have felt wrong. Arlen simply removed his cap. The nurse from the night clinic wiped her eyes near the coffee station. The boutique owner bought 12 cinnamon knots and finally said the apology she had carried for days. Clayton stood at the counter, looking at the wheat mark loaves as if the room had folded time in half and placed him back under the awning on that rainy night. You kept the lights on, he said. Eileen gave him a tired smile. You brought people back to them. By the end of that week, the motorcycles became part of the bakery's rhythm. Once a month, the riders placed a paid order for wheat mark loaves, butter rolls, and black coffee, then delivered them to the night clinic, the county road crew, truck drivers resting past midnight, and older neighbors who would never ask for help out loud. Vernon's group scaled back the project after the landlord refused to list the bakery as vacant, moving the new storefronts farther down the block, but Porter's hearth remained where it was, warm and stubborn, with steam on the windows and the smell of rye, butter, and cinnamon drifting into the cold. One evening, after the last customer left, Eileen found Clayton sitting outside on the same bench where she had once watched a hungry stranger eat slowly in the rain. His 1998 Harley-Davidson Road King was parked by the curb, older now, polished better, still carrying road scars that matched its rider. She stepped outside with 2 warm loaves in a plain brown bag. Clayton reached for his wallet. Eileen shook her head and handed him the bag anyway. One is paid for, she said. The other is for the road. Clayton looked down at the wheat mark pressed into the crust, then back at the woman who had never known how far one free loaf had traveled. He placed his palm over his chest the same way he had years before. This time, she knew his name. This time, he did not ride away alone. Behind him, the club waited in quiet formation, not as a threat, not as a show, but as the family that had returned to save the bakery of the woman who once fed their brother when he had nothing left but hunger and pride. And sometimes, the road brings people back not to repay a debt, but to become the family someone never knew they needed. If you believe in the true brotherhood and kindness of bikers, please hit the like button, leave a comment, and subscribe to our channel for more stories. Disclaimer: this story is a fictional narrative created for entertainment, reflection, and educational purposes. Any resemblance to real people, places, or events is purely coincidental.